For 12 years, a faded canvas tote bag sat zipped shut inside a plastic storage bin in my garage, buried under old lesson plans and a broken space heater I never fixed. I never opened it. Then one Saturday morning, clearing out that garage before movers came, I unzipped that bag and found something that would change the rest of my life. But before I tell you what it was, and before I tell you about the man who tried to take it from me, welcome to Kate's Fortune Stories. It's Kate again, and I'm so happy you're here with me. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe because this story is only just beginning. The garage had been the last room on my list for almost 2 years. That's how it goes when you finally decide to downsize. You pack the kitchen first, then the bookshelves, because books are easy. You just box them and move on. The bedroom takes longer because every drawer holds some small decision you didn't know you'd still have to make. And the garage you save for last because it's where the things you couldn't decide about end up waiting for a future version of you to decide instead. My name is Nora Ashby. I was 49 years old, never married, no children, and had spent 14 years teaching 3rd grade at Blue Ridge Elementary in Asheville, North Carolina. I had lived in the same rented craftsman bungalow for 9 of those years, a small house with a leaky gutter and a garden I mostly let go wild, close enough to school that I walked most mornings, far enough from downtown that the tourists never found their way to my street. I wasn't downsizing because of heartbreak or divorce. I was downsizing because the district had just offered early retirement buyouts to teachers with enough years in, and after 14 years of grading spelling tests at midnight, I had finally said yes. I was moving into a smaller condo across town, and the garage, full of a decade and a half of accumulated life, had to be dealt with before the movers arrived on Monday. Before I taught 3rd grade, I had a different life entirely. In my mid-30s, I worked as a graphic designer at a small branding agency downtown, the kind of job where everyone wore band t-shirts to client meetings and believed, at least for a while, that we were about to change something. That was the life that had, in a roundabout way, led to the tote bag in the plastic bin. I'd gotten that tote bag as a giveaway at a weekend hackathon I attended almost by accident, tagging along with a coworker who thought it would be good for our portfolio. It was a canvas bag printed with some now-defunct startup's logo, and I carried it for exactly 1 weekend before it went into a drawer and then, eventually, a storage bin. My life moved on. I left the agency 2 years later for teaching, which had always felt more like the actual point of me, and the bag followed me through 3 moves and stayed sealed the entire time. I almost didn't open that bin at all. I had a donation pile spreading across the garage floor, and I was working fast, item after item, barely registering what I picked up. But something about the shape of a tote, a small hard rectangle pressing against the canvas from the inside, made me pause and unzip it instead of just tossing the whole bin into the truck. Inside was a folded piece of printer paper, gone soft and slightly yellowed at the creases, and a small black USB device I didn't immediately recognize, tucked into the tote's inner mesh pocket. I remembered the moment almost the instant I saw the handwriting. It was Julian's. Julian Reyes had been at that hackathon too, an engineer 3 years younger than me who I'd started seeing not long after. He'd stayed up most of the weekend building a mining tool with a team of strangers, and on the last night, half laughing, handed me the USB drive and a sheet of paper covered in 24 random words. "That's yours now," he'd said. "Just don't lose it. It's basically nothing right now." He told me it was a wallet, holding a small amount of something called Bitcoin he'd mined that weekend. I had no idea what that meant. I put both things in the tote bag, and within a few months, Julian and I weren't together anymore, and neither the relationship nor the strange little gift had crossed my mind since. I nearly set both items aside without a second thought, ready to toss them into the donation pile along with everything else. My hand actually hovered over the bin. It was 12 years old. Whatever it was probably worthless, an old tech relic from a man I hadn't spoken to since. But there was a small, stubborn part of me, the same part that makes me double-check every reading assessment before I file it away, that told me to set the paper and the device on my kitchen counter instead and finish the garage first. I finished the garage a couple of hours later, and then I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, a mug of coffee going cold beside me, and typed how to check an old Bitcoin wallet into the search bar, feeling faintly ridiculous even as I did it. I found a reputable wallet recovery tool, entered the 24 words exactly as they were written on that soft, folded paper, and watched a balance load onto the screen. I stared at the number for a long time, certain I had misread a decimal point, certain the page would refresh itself back into something sensible. It didn't. According to the wallet, sitting untouched inside it for 12 years, was a little over 600 Bitcoin worth, at that afternoon's exchange rate, just over $45 million. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I closed the laptop, put both the paper and the little black device into a Ziploc bag, and hid it inside my winter boot in the back of my closet, because some instinct told me a piece of paper worth $45 million shouldn't sit on a counter in a house full of open boxes and unlocked doors. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to my own house settle around me, and thought about the number, $45 million. I said it in my head over and over, the way you repeat something in a language you don't yet trust yourself to pronounce, trying to make it feel real instead of like a sentence from someone else's life that had accidentally landed in mine. By 2 a.m, the shock had started to give way to something else. Not joy exactly, but a low, persistent unease I couldn't name at first. I sat up in the dark and opened my old email account and searched for Julian's name. What came back was a handful of old messages, and then a stream of recent tech press coverage. Julian Reyes was no longer the guy coding in his apartment on cold pizza. He was the founder and CEO of a fintech company called Ledgerwell, based in Austin, recently valued at just under $2 billion. I sat there in the dark with that fact settling slowly into my chest. Whatever this wallet actually was, however casually he had handed it to me 12 years ago, Julian Reyes was now a man who understood exactly what 600 Bitcoin was worth and exactly how it had gotten into my possession. I set the phone down and sat in the dark for a long time, my heart doing something slow and heavy in my chest. Had he forgotten about it entirely? Or did a man who'd built his entire career around digital assets remember every wallet he'd ever touched, the way some people remember every phone number they've ever dialed? I hadn't told a single living soul about what I'd found. I had spoken to no one but a recovery website. There was no reason, I told myself, for Julian to know anything had changed. But I also remembered something about him. Julian had a habit, even back then, of keeping meticulous records of things most people wouldn't bother tracking, who owed him money for a shared dinner, exactly how much equity he believed he was owed in conversations everyone else had already forgotten. At the time, I'd found it endearing, a kind of nerdy precision. Now, sitting in my dark bedroom with a wallet worth $45 million locked inside a boot, I understood it differently. It was the habit of a man who did not let things go. I made myself stop. I made myself breathe slowly, the way I coach an anxious 8-year-old through a math test they're convinced they're going to fail. I had spent most of my adult life letting other people's confidence steamroll my own uncertainty, in relationships, in salary negotiations, in 100 small moments where I deferred instead of asked. I was not going to start doing that with something worth $45 million. I was going to think clearly instead. I got out of bed at 4 and made coffee, sitting where 12 hours earlier I'd watched that number load onto a screen. I pulled a notepad from my junk drawer and wrote what I know, what I need to do. First, tell no one yet. Second, find a lawyer who understands digital assets, not a general practice attorney. Third, Do not move the wallet or attempt to cash any of it out until I understand where I stand legally. I stared at the list, the sky slowly turning pale blue-gray before a Blue Ridge sunrise. Then I added a fourth line. Document everything you remember about how you got it. It wasn't a plan yet, not really. It was the outline of one, rough and incomplete. But for the first time since I had watched that balance load onto my screen, I didn't feel like a woman something was simply happening to. I felt like a woman beginning, carefully and deliberately, to take control of what happened next. I thought about calling my younger brother, Theo, right then. I picked up my phone twice and put it back down twice. Theo worked in software himself, out in Charlotte, and he would understand the mechanics of what I'd found faster than I ever could. But I loved him too much to hand him a secret this size before I understood what it might cost either of us to keep. I decided I would tell him once I had something solid, not just a number, but a plan to protect it. I spent that Monday at school in a strange, floating daze, helping 8-year-olds sound out vowel teams while carrying, in my school bag zip pocket, a folded piece of paper worth more than the entire school's annual budget. That evening I sat with my laptop again, not to check the balance, but to search for attorneys. Cryptocurrency ownership dispute, digital asset attorney North Carolina, wallet gift versus loan, unjust enrichment crypto. I read through more legal terminology in one evening than in my entire adult life combined. One name kept surfacing across several legal directories and a fintech law blog I found through a forum thread. Renata Solis, a Charlotte-based attorney who specialized in digital asset disputes, with a background that included several early cases involving cryptocurrency ownership claims between former business partners and former romantic partners. Her firm's website was plain and precise, entirely without the glossy self-promotion of some of the other pages I'd found. I liked that immediately. I didn't call from my own phone, some instinct telling me to be careful. I drove to a coffee shop across town the next morning and called Renata Solis's office from the shop's landline. Her assistant scheduled me for that Friday. I hung up and stood there in the cool morning air, the Ziploc bag tucked deep inside my school bag, $45 million, a number I could not yet fully believe belonged to me. Renata Solis's office occupied the 4th floor of a converted warehouse building in Charlotte's South End, exposed brick and big windows that let in more honest light than any law office I'd ever imagined. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of unhurried composure that made you feel, within 30 seconds of meeting her, that she had heard every version of every complicated story a person could bring into her office and had never once been rattled by one. I laid it all out for her in the order I had rehearsed on the drive over, the hackathon, the gift, the exact words Julian had used, the 12 years the wallet had sat untouched, the fact that he was now the CEO of a $2 billion company that made its entire living off of understanding exactly what a Bitcoin wallet was worth. She listened without interrupting once, her pen moving steadily across a legal pad. When I finished, she set the pen down and looked at me directly. "The good news," she said, "is that what you're describing sounds like a completed gift. He gave you the device, told you it was yours, and had no further involvement for 12 years. That's about as clean a fact pattern as this area of law gets. The complication is proof. You have no written record, no email or text confirming what he said. What you have is your own memory, and the fact he never once, in 12 years, asked for it back." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Is that enough?" "It's a real advantage," Renata said. "But if Julian decides to contest this, and given who he's become, I'd assume he will, his attorneys will argue the wallet was never a gift at all, that it was a loan, or shared property from a collaborative project, or that you were merely holding it in trust for him. Which is exactly why we're going to build as thorough a record as we can, starting now, before he even knows you've recovered it." She walked me through what she would need. Any old messages between us, even fragments. Any photographs from the hackathon, showing the two of us together. Records from the wallet itself, showing it had never been accessed by anyone but me since its creation. I thought hard, mentally retracing a weekend I hadn't thought about in real detail in years. I think I still have an old external hard drive with photos from around then, I said slowly. I never deleted anything. I just stopped looking at it. Renata allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her all afternoon. Find that hard drive today if you can. Photographs with metadata showing the date and location could be extremely valuable. Anything that puts the two of you together at that hackathon on that specific weekend strengthens the story enormously. There's something else, I said, remembering. I think I posted something on social media that weekend, some old platform I don't even use anymore. I don't know if the account still exists. Renata leaned forward slightly. Find that too if you can. Screenshot everything before it disappears. She paused, studying me. I want to be honest with you about what's ahead. If Julian finds out about this, and given the visibility of his company, there's a real chance this becomes public, whether either of you wants it to or not. But if we can establish clearly and early that this was an unambiguous gift, made specifically to you, with no strings attached and no further claim asserted for over a decade, we have a genuinely strong position going in. I retained her that afternoon, writing a check for the retainer with a hand that surprised me by staying steady. On the drive home, I stopped by my mother's old storage unit and found the external hard drive buried under a stack of old sketchbooks. I plugged it in that night and scrolled through photographs I hadn't looked at in over a decade, and there it was, a blurry, time-stamped photo from that hackathon weekend. Julian and me side by side at a folding table, laughing at something out of frame. My hands were shaking as I saved a backup copy. It was real, documented, not just a memory I could be talked out of. I was still sitting at my kitchen table absorbing the relief of that discovery when a text came through from Theo. I read it twice before it fully landed. Hey, weird question. A guy named Julian Reyes just followed me on LinkedIn and sent a message asking if I still talk to you. Do you know him? Should I respond? I sat very still, my thumb hovering over the screen. Julian was already circling. Somehow he had caught the scent of something. Had someone at the recovery service flagged unusual activity to a partner exchange? Had he simply kept an automated watch on that old wallet address this entire time, the way I now suspected he kept watch on most things he considered, even loosely, his? The tech world in a place like Austin had a way of being smaller than anyone expected. I typed back carefully. Old friend from years ago, nothing important. Don't respond, I'll explain later. Love you. Then I set the phone down and, following Renata's instructions from that afternoon, photographed every piece of evidence I had gathered so far. The seed phrase paper, the little black device, the hackathon photograph, the wallet's transaction history printed out and dated. I uploaded copies of everything to a secure cloud folder Renata's office had set up for me. I understood, sitting at my kitchen table that night with my phone open to Theo's message, that the real point of no return hadn't been recovering the wallet, or calling the lawyer, or even finding that old photograph. It was this moment, staring at a stranger's message that wasn't even addressed to me, knowing that somewhere in Austin, Julian Reyes was already beginning to move, already asking questions, already circling something he could sense but not yet name. And so, quietly and deliberately, I began moving too. Renata reached out to a licensed digital asset custodian the following week to begin securing and eventually converting a portion of the holdings, working to establish a documented chain of possession before anyone on the other side knew the wallet had been touched. 3 weeks later, we met with a forensic blockchain analyst Renata had retained, who confirmed the wallet had never once been accessed, moved, or queried by anyone but me, from its creation 12 years earlier until the night I opened it in my kitchen. The custodian confirmed the wallet's contents that same week. 611 Bitcoin, worth just over $45 million. Renata had advised converting in careful stages, both to manage tax exposure and to avoid drawing attention through one enormous transaction. Even accounting for that caution, the number that would eventually settle into my accounts, after taxes, came to somewhere around $27 million, a figure so large my mind kept sliding off it, the way your eyes slide off a word you've stared at too long until it stops looking real. We were about 10 days into the custody process when Julian called me directly. I hadn't heard his voice in 12 years. It had changed in small ways, deeper somehow, more measured, carrying a particular confidence that hadn't been there when he was 28 and living on instant noodles. "Nora," he said, "it's been a long time. I think we need to talk." "About what, Julian?" A pause. "I think you know." I was standing in my kitchen, one hand resting flat against the counter, watching a cardinal land on the fence outside my window, and then take off again almost immediately. "I don't know what you're referring to," I said, keeping my voice level. "If you have something specific to say, say it." He exhaled audibly. "My general counsel will be reaching out to whoever you're working with. We believe there's an outstanding matter regarding a wallet from a collaborative project I led, and I'd like to resolve it directly, without this turning into something ugly." There it was, dressed up in careful corporate language, but unmistakable. "That's between your attorney and mine," I said. "Don't call me about this again." I hung up before he could respond. The formal letter arrived at Renata's office 2 days later, not a lawsuit yet, but a demand letter from Ledgewell's outside counsel, a firm called Whitlock and Graves, asserting that the wallet in question had been created as part of a collaborative hackathon project, that its contents constituted intellectual and financial property of the project team, and that Julian Reyes, as team lead, was entitled to either the return of the assets or fair compensation for their current value. Renata and I met that evening, and she read through the letter with the quiet, focused attention of someone examining a diagnostic scan. "It's aggressive but thin," she said, which I was beginning to understand was her particular way of saying, "This is going to be a fight, but we're not losing it." They're trying to reframe a personal gift as a corporate asset. If Julian genuinely believed the wallet belonged to some kind of team project, he had 12 years to say so. He never touched it. He never mentioned it. That silence works heavily in our favor. Can they still win? If a judge accepts their framing, and if they can produce anyone from that hackathon willing to testify the wallet was meant to be shared, it gets messy, Renata said. "But we have the photograph, the transaction history, showing zero activity from anyone but you for over a decade, and his own company's public materials describing that hackathon as an informal event with no ownership agreements. Our position is solid. It's not unbeatable, but it's solid." In the weeks that followed, Julian's team escalated in ways that felt designed to unsettle rather than to win outright. Simone Whitlock, the lead partner handling the case, and, according to a tech gossip site Theo found, also Julian's current girlfriend, called Theo directly, informing my brother that his sister had potentially taken possession of assets belonging to a publicly traded company's founder, and that this raised, in her words, serious questions about intent that could extend beyond a simple civil matter. Theo called me immediately afterward, furious in a way I hadn't heard from him since we were teenagers. I met him for dinner 2 nights later at a barbecue place near his apartment in Charlotte, and I told him everything: the hackathon, the gift, the wallet sitting untouched for 12 years, the legal fight now unfolding around it. I watched his expression move through disbelief, then anger, then something quieter and steadier by the end of the meal. "They called me to scare you into folding," he said flatly, setting down his fork. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what that was. What do you need me to do?" "Nothing," I said. "Stay out of it completely. Let me and Renata handle this." He studied me for a long moment across the table, something shifting in his expression. "You're going to win this, aren't you?" It wasn't really a question. Renata filed a preemptive action in state court a few weeks later, asking the court to formally declare the wallet my sole property before Ledgerwell's team could frame the narrative first. The preliminary hearing lasted just under 30 minutes. The presiding judge, the Honorable Priscilla Youngblood, reviewed both filings and declined to freeze the assets, finding no sufficient evidence at that early stage that the wallet constituted disputed corporate property. It wasn't a full victory, but it meant nothing was frozen, and I still had time and leverage on my side. After the hearing, I drove home and didn't leave my house for 3 full days. I took the rest of that week off from my part-time substitute work, something I almost never did. I wore the same sweater for 2 days straight, ate cereal standing at the counter, and let myself simply exist without armor for a little while because I had been braced for a fight for weeks, and my body finally quietly insisted on a pause. On the morning of the 4th day, I woke early out of habit, made my coffee, and felt something settle into my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief exactly, and not confidence either, but something steadier than both. Readiness. I called Renata that afternoon. "What happens next?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we prepare for a full hearing on the merits, and we make sure that when we walk into that courtroom, there isn't a single gap in our evidence for them to find." The call about a settlement came predictably through Theo. Julian had learned that direct pressure wasn't moving me, and that the legal process was grinding forward on a timeline he couldn't control. So he tried a different approach. Theo called on a Tuesday evening, and I could hear the careful neutrality in his voice, the tone he used when relaying information without editorializing. "Julian wants to know if you'd be open to a settlement conversation," he said. "His team thinks there's a number that could make this go away before it gets more public." I was sitting in my reading chair by the window, a book open on my lap that I hadn't actually been reading for the last 20 minutes. "What kind of number?" He mentioned something like 30% of the current value. Theo paused. "Nora, that's—" I know what 30% of 45 million is, Theo. He's framing it as a fair resolution, given the, quote, ambiguous origins of the gift. His words. I looked out the window at my garden gone wild, at an entirely ordinary Tuesday evening that had no idea what was happening inside my head. "I want you to listen to me carefully," I said. "This offer isn't fairness. It's a calculation. He and his lawyers know their claim is weak, and they're trying to extract something before a judge tells them they'll get nothing at all." Silence on the line for a moment. "So you're saying no?" "I'm saying that a woman who was handed something with the words, 'That's yours now,' and held on to it for 12 years without touching it doesn't owe 30% of it to the man who said those words and then forgot they existed." "Yes, I'm saying no." Theo exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. And then, after a pause, "Good." After I hung up, I sat in that chair a long time, aware that the number had been real money, not an abstraction. Over $13 million offered as the price of making the whole conflict disappear. I understood exactly why some people would have taken it, the stress, the exposure, the exhausting cost of fighting a man with a legal department. But I understood something else too, quietly forming since the night I first watched that balance load onto my screen. If I handed Julian $13 million he had no legitimate claim to, I'd be handing him a story, the story of a woman who folded when pressed by someone with power, and I was finished being that woman. I called my closest friend, Dot Feldman, the next morning. We had taught next door to each other for 9 years, bonded over shared horror at a curriculum overhaul. She was blunt, warm, and incapable of softening a hard truth, exactly the person I needed that morning. I told her everything, sitting at her kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee going cold between us. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You've been carrying all of this completely alone for weeks. I didn't want to put it on anyone until I understood what it actually was. Nora," she looked at me steadily, "you need to let people help you. Let me help you. What do you need right now?" I thought about it honestly. I need someone who isn't a lawyer to tell me I'm not being unreasonable. "You're not," she said immediately, without a beat of hesitation. He gave it to you. You held on to it. It's yours. That same week, Renata introduced me to a financial advisor named Andre Wexford, a quiet, methodical man who specialized in sudden wealth management and had, over the course of a long career, seen enough windfall clients to have developed an almost soothing bedside manner around the whole subject. He walked me through the staged conversion plan Renata's office had built, reviewed the tax implications in detail, and then, near the end of our meeting, asked me a question no one else had bothered to ask yet. What do you actually want your life to look like once this is settled? I had to stop and genuinely think about it. A small house, I said, with a real garden this time, one I actually take care of. Somewhere Theo can come stay whenever he wants. He wrote it down, which I appreciated more than I expected to. And I want to fund something for classroom technology, especially at underfunded elementary schools, the kind that never have enough working computers or reliable internet. He wrote that down too. And I want Theo's mortgage gone, I added. I want that pressure off him. Sitting in that office, I understood something had shifted. Somewhere out there, Julian and Simone were watching, waiting, calculating their next move. But in that conference room, I was quietly, deliberately building the outline of a life I actually wanted, a life entirely separate from the one I was fighting to protect. That, I realized slowly, was its own kind of victory, and I hadn't even reached the courthouse yet. They came to my house on a Saturday morning, which felt, in hindsight, entirely deliberate. Saturdays are softer than weekdays. People's guards are lower. I saw an unfamiliar black SUV pull into my driveway at a little past 10 and felt a small, cold recognition settle in my stomach. Julian looked different in person, taller than I remembered, dressed in the kind of understated expensive clothing that only looks understated once you know what it costs. Behind him, a woman I recognized from the tech gossip photos, Simone Whitlock, stepped out of the passenger side. They knocked. I considered briefly not answering at all, then considered what silence might look like written up later as evidence of evasiveness, and opened the door. I'd gone into the kitchen first to pour myself a second cup of coffee, so by the time they stepped inside, I was leaning against the counter in an old cardigan, reading glasses pushed up into my hair, looking, I hoped, like a woman mildly and reasonably inconvenienced on her Saturday off. Julian looked the way successful men in his industry always seemed to look in person, carefully casual, his expression arranged into the pleasant mask he probably wore in every investor meeting. Simone Whitlock was harder to look past, around 38, sharp-featured, with the deliberate stillness of someone who'd learned that saying less made people fill the silence for her. She wore a tailor blazer, and I watched her eyes sweep my house the way she'd assess a courtroom before opening statements. I saw exactly what she saw, modest, unremarkable, and watched her settle into an assumption of advantage. "Nora," Julian said warmly, "thanks for letting us in. It's been a long time." "It has," I said pleasantly. "Coffee." They sat on my couch. Simone set a slim, leather folder on her knee with the practiced ease of someone who wanted me to notice it before she'd even opened it. We thought a direct conversation might be more productive than continuing this through filings, Julian said, in a tone I could tell had been rehearsed on the drive over. "I'm not here to fight you, Nora. I genuinely think we can find a resolution that respects what we both remember about that weekend." I held my mug in both hands. "What we both remember," I repeated. "This situation," Simone said smoothly, taking over, "has real potential to become extremely public given Julian's profile, which serves no one's interests. Legal costs at a full hearing would be substantial, and press attention tends not to be selective about whose history it digs into." She opened the folder to reveal a document, 3 pages, tapped for signatures. "We have a revised offer we believe is genuinely generous. 25% of the current post-tax value. Just under $6.75 million. In exchange, Julian withdraws all claims permanently and the matter is resolved with a confidentiality agreement. I didn't look at the document. I looked at Simone instead. 6.75 million was a smaller absolute number than the 30% of the pre-conversion figure Theo had relayed a week earlier, which told me, quietly and clearly, exactly how their confidence in the underlying claim had shifted since the preliminary hearing had gone against them. The math, once I actually worked it through, revealed a retreat dressed up as generosity. "Nora," Julian said, his voice softening into a register I hadn't heard from him in 12 years, the one he used to use when he wanted to sound as though something personal, not strategic, was happening. That weekend meant something to me. I know it's been a long time, but I don't want this to turn into something that erases whatever we actually had. I set my mug down on the counter with a small, deliberate click. "Julian," I said, "I want to make sure I understand this correctly. You're sitting on my couch offering me a portion of something you handed me 12 years ago and never once asked about again, in exchange for me not continuing to defend a legal claim your own lawyer knows has no real merit. Is that an accurate summary?" Simone's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "The claim has substantial merit," she said, and there was a new crispness in her voice now, professional and a little defensive. "The origin of that wallet within a collaborative project is well documented in." "Renata Solis's reading of the relevant law differs from yours," I said. "And so does Judge Youngblood's, based on her denial of your request 3 weeks ago." Silence settled over the room. Julian glanced at Simone. Simone glanced at me. "If you refuse this offer," Simone said, her voice flattening into something harder, "we will absolutely pursue this to a full hearing and, depending on the outcome, potentially further appeal. That process could take well over a year. Every detail of your finances, your history, your relationship with Julian, all of it becomes part of the public record." It was dressed as a warning, but it landed in my chest exactly like what it actually was, a threat. I felt the cold weight settle beneath my ribs, and then almost immediately something else beneath that. A steadiness that didn't come from an absence of fear, but from having decided very clearly and very recently that I was far more afraid of losing myself again than I was of losing this fight. "Then we'll see each other in court," I said. They left not long after. Julian went first, and I noticed the small, rigid set of his shoulders, the particular way he carried anger he wasn't allowed to express out loud in front of his own attorney. Simone followed, and at the door she paused and looked back at me with an expression I couldn't fully place, something caught between contempt and a kind of reluctant respect. The door closed behind them. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment afterward, my hands trembling slightly now that I no longer had to keep them steady for an audience. I pressed my palms flat against the cold counter and breathed slowly, deliberately, until the shaking eased. I understood exactly what I had just done. They would come at me now with everything they had. A drawn-out hearing, possible public exposure, every uncomfortable detail of my life laid open for scrutiny. I had said no to $6.75 million, and there was no walking that back. But standing there, I thought about every time in my adult life I had said yes instead, simply to avoid conflict, to smooth things over, to keep from being the difficult one in the room. Every small concession that had, one at a time, made me smaller and smaller until there was barely enough of me left to notice the shrinking. I was not going to do that again. Not for $6 million, and not for anything else. I called Renata that same evening. They came to the house. I told her. 25%. Post-tax. I declined. There was a brief pause on the line. "Good," she said simply. "We prepare for the hearing." "Yes," I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "We prepare." The weeks leading up to the hearing passed in a strange, suspended rhythm, substitute teaching, evidence review in the evenings, long calls with Renata going over testimony and exhibit numbers. Theo drove up from Charlotte the weekend before, insisting on being there even though I told him it wasn't necessary. He sat across my kitchen table one evening going through the timeline with me, and at the end of it looked up and said quietly, "You know this is going to work, right? Everything about this is airtight." "I know the evidence is solid," I told him. "I don't know what a courtroom is going to feel like from the inside." "Nobody does until they're standing in one." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and for a moment neither of us said anything else. Outside, the mountain evening was settling into deep blue, and somewhere in Austin, I knew Julian and Simone were doing their own version of the same preparation, building their own case toward the same courtroom, the same judge, the same reckoning. The courtroom, when the hearing finally began, was smaller than I had expected, not the grand wood-paneled chamber of a television drama, but a plain, fluorescent-lit space with worn carpet and the faint particular smell of old paper that seems to live in every courthouse regardless of how modern the building around it is. Judge Priscilla Youngblood entered at 9 sharp, and the whole room reorganized itself instinctively around her presence in the way rooms do around real authority. I sat at the petitioner's table beside Renata, a legal pad in front of me with a single line written at the top in block letters, the date of that hackathon weekend 12 years earlier. I didn't need it written down. I knew that date better than my own birthday by then, but seeing it there in ink made everything feel solid in a way that weeks of mental preparation hadn't quite managed. Julian and Simone sat at the respondents' table, alongside a second attorney who had joined for the hearing itself. Simone opened with a clean, confident argument. The wallet, she said, had originated from a collaborative project, and absent a clear, documented gift agreement, its contents should be treated as jointly developed property belonging to the project's lead contributor. She was genuinely good, precise, fluent in the relevant case law. I watched Judge Youngblood taking notes in small, even handwriting, and felt the familiar cold weight return to my stomach. Then Renata stood. "Your Honor," she said, "the respondent's argument rests entirely on the premise that this was a corporate or collaborative asset. Our evidence today will demonstrate that this premise is directly contradicted by 12 years of undisputed, exclusive, unilateral possession, by a photograph placing the parties together at the moment of transfer, and by the respondent's own public statements describing this event as an informal gathering with no ownership structure whatsoever." She walked the court through the evidence in careful order. First, the dated photograph from the hackathon. Second, the blockchain's own transaction record, showing the wallet had never been accessed by anyone but me from its creation until the night I recovered it, an unbroken 12-year chain of exclusive control. Third, an archived press interview in which Julian himself, 5 years earlier, described that exact hackathon as just a bunch of us messing around for a weekend, no strings attached, no ownership agreements, just for fun. Every piece pointed the same direction. Judge Youngblood examined each exhibit with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who could not be rushed by either side. I couldn't read her expression, but I had learned by then that reading a judge's face mattered far less than having facts solid enough to speak for themselves. Simone's cross-examination began confidently, but started to unravel when she challenged the archived interview, arguing Julian's comments referred to a different, unrelated project. Judge Youngblood asked her to point to the transcript portion supporting that distinction. Simone paused, flipping through her copy, and offered an interpretation Renata was on her feet within seconds to correct, noting the interviewer's very next question had named the hackathon by date and location, closing off the ambiguity Simone had tried to introduce. The room went very quiet. "Counselor," Judge Youngblood said, in the even, unhurried tone of someone who never needed to raise her voice, "are you disputing that this interview refers to the same event?" A pause stretched a beat too long. "Your Honor, our position is that the comments were informal and shouldn't be read as—" Simone began, then stopped. "Has Mr. Reyes ever, in the 12 years since, asserted a claim to this specific wallet?" Judge Youngblood asked, not unkindly. Another pause, shorter but harder. Simone did not have an answer ready. I felt it in that moment. Not a dramatic break, but a subtle shift, the way light changes when a cloud moves across the sun. Simone recovered her composure within a few seconds, which was professionally genuinely impressive, but something had already slipped away from her that she wasn't going to be able to fully recover the judge's confidence in the strength of her argument. And then Julian made it worse. He hadn't been scheduled to testify. Renata had warned me Simone might avoid calling him at all, since an unsteady witness does more damage than none. But Julian leaned towards Simone and muttered something, and she shook her head, and he said it again louder before she could stop him. "I want to say something," he said, addressing the judge directly. Judge Youngblood looked at him over her glasses. "Mr. Reyes, you're represented by counsel. If you wish to testify." She knew what that wallet could become. Julian said, controlled for maybe 4 words, then not. "I built that. I mined that. She just happened to be standing there when I handed it off, and now she's sitting there acting like—" "You will not speak again unless your attorney has the floor," Judge Youngblood said, her voice carrying genuine weight now. "Is that understood?" The courtroom had gone completely still. Simone placed a hand on Julian's arm, her own face perfectly composed, even as I could see from across the room the rapid internal recalculation happening behind her eyes. I looked at Julian. Even 12 years ago, I remembered a handful of moments when his composure had cracked, and every single time he had looked not powerful in that moment, but diminished, reduced by his own certainty into something smaller and more transparent than he wanted to be seen as. He looked small now, sitting at that table. I looked back down at my legal pad, at that single date written in block letters, and Renata caught my eye across the table and gave me one small, almost invisible nod. We rested our case shortly before noon. Judge Youngblood issued her written ruling 11 days later. Renata had explained to me that this was how it usually worked. Judges rarely announce dramatic verdicts from the bench the way courtroom dramas suggest. They review the full record carefully, they write, and eventually a document lands quietly in your attorney's inbox, and that document determines the rest of your life. Renata called me at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee in hand, about to head out for a substitute teaching assignment. I had made a point through the entire process of continuing my ordinary life exactly as it had been before, showing up for my classes, grading papers, because the alternative was letting the waiting consume every part of me, and I had decided weeks earlier that I wasn't going to let that happen. "Nora," Renata said, "the ruling is in. Judge Youngblood found entirely in your favor." I sat down right there on the kitchen floor, my legs simply deciding for me. The towel was cold through my slacks. I pressed my back against the cabinet and listened as Renata walked me through the ruling. The wallet had been established as an unambiguous gift, confirmed by 12 years of exclusive, undisturbed possession the respondent had never once attempted to contest until its value became substantial. The respondent's claim had failed to meet its burden at every stage. Judge Youngblood had noted that his own recorded public statements directly contradicted the position taken in his filing, a contradiction, in her words, difficult to reconcile with good faith. Renata said that phrase was about as close as a judge comes to open skepticism on the record. The claim was dismissed with prejudice, meaning Julian could not refile the same argument again. And because the court found the challenge to have been pursued in a manner that caused unnecessary cost and delay to me as the petitioner, Julian was ordered to cover a substantial portion of my legal costs. "Is it over?" I asked, still sitting on the floor. "It's finally over," Renata said. "Congratulations, Nora. It's entirely and completely yours now." I sat on that kitchen floor a long time after we hung up. The relief was too large to process all at once. I looked at the water stain on my ceiling I'd meant to fix for months. I looked at a photo of Theo and me from a hiking trip years earlier. And then, quietly, I cried, sitting there in my school clothes, my phone still warm against my chest. I was suddenly nearly $27 million richer than the day before, but what I felt wasn't the money itself. It was the solid satisfaction of having stood my ground through every moment when everything in my history had trained me to fold instead. I hadn't given in during Julian's phone call. I hadn't given in during the Saturday morning visit with the leather folder and its neat signature tabs. I had stayed exactly where I was through all of it. I called Theo first. He picked up on the first ring. "We won," I told him. He made a sound I genuinely never heard him make before. Half laugh, half sob, something like a pressure valve finally releasing. "Of course you did," he said, once he could get the words out. "Come to dinner Friday. I'm cooking. Are you going to cook with money now?" I laughed, and it came out of me easily, freely, in a way that surprised me. "No, I'm going to cook with butter and garlic like a normal person." I called Dot next, and she screamed loudly enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear, apologized, and then immediately screamed again. The staged conversion moved through Renata's office and Andre's planned over the following weeks. Nearly $27 million after taxes settled into accounts that carried my name and only my name, with the clean, quiet efficiency of something finally going right. I paid Renata first, then the taxes. Then I transferred enough to clear Theo's mortgage without warning him and received a call at 11 that night from a brother, crying so hard he could barely get the words out. I put the phone on speaker and let him talk for almost an hour. I drove out to that same coffee shop where I'd made the call to Renata's office, and I sat at the same little table by the window, and I ordered myself something absurdly expensive off the menu just because I could, and I watched the ordinary evening traffic move down the street outside, the whole world getting on with itself, having no idea. Then I got back in my car and drove home. I bought a small house that following spring, a cottage on the edge of town with a real garden already established, mature trees, and a kitchen with windows on 2 full walls. Theo came over the first weekend with his fiancée and a bottle of wine, and we ate takeout sitting on the floor because none of the furniture had arrived yet. And I watched my brother laugh in a house that was genuinely entirely mine and understood I wasn't rebuilding my old life at all. I was building something new from the ground up. I launched the Ashby Classroom Fund that following autumn, funding new computers, reliable internet access, and updated technology for 14 underfunded elementary schools across western North Carolina, and in 3 cases covering the salary of a technology aide that budget cuts had eliminated entirely. I visited those classrooms myself when I could, and sitting in the back of those rooms watching kids use working equipment for the first time, I felt something close to complete contentment. I still substitute teach a few weeks a year, mostly because I genuinely miss it. Leduel's finances, by contrast, took a visible hit. The public ruling drew unwanted press attention Julian had specifically tried to avoid, and 2 of his major investors quietly began pulling back involvement in the months that followed. Simone Whitlock was formally reprimanded by the state bar the following year for the mischaracterized interview transcript, along with a separate complaint related to her direct contact with Theo during active litigation. Their relationship, according to what little I still hear through mutual acquaintances, did not survive the fallout either. About 18 months after the final ruling, I was standing in my new kitchen with the radio playing something I'd loved back in my 30s, stirring a pot of soup on the stove, and I caught myself dancing, just my shoulders, just a little, completely without meaning to. And I thought, standing there in a kitchen that was entirely mine, in a life I had built stubbornly and deliberately out of the wreckage of an old one, there it is. There's the version of me I fought so hard to become. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit subscribe, because there are so many more like it waiting for you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. This has been Kate, and I'll see you in the next one.